Right, good evening.
Come in.
The agenda's on the left-hand side of the screen there, with the current rules that you have to abide by. Can you hear me? Because I've got a note on the screen. Oh, I'm on mute now. Okay. I'll be talking about how you're going to prove you've done the flight. Just one or two possible problems you might feel you've got on the day, some useful tips, and before we finish with the question and answer, we'll have two happy endings, and I'll leave you to interpret that as you wish. Okay, just some simple maths first of all. 50 kilometers in a 30-to-1 glider requires a total height gain of just under 5,500 feet. We can actually get to 5,500 feet, can't we? Straight away over our side. Oh, something's happened to this screen there. Flying at 50k, it says behind the little diagram, will actually only take you 33 minutes. So if we assume, looking at the diagram, that you take a winch launch to 1,000 feet, straight into a thermal up to 4,000 feet, glide off in your 30-to-1 glider until you're down to 2,000 feet, where there's a nice convenient little thermal again, thermal up just to 4,000 feet, and just glide out and land. You've done your 50k. Easy peasy. Ain't a problem. Now, of course, it's not quite that simple, so let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. First, what are the Fai Branch Requirements? Now, you need to be a little bit careful and make sure that you're up to date here. You can Google the gliding sporting code if you wish. The last one was produced effective from October 2019, and there have been changes in the definition of the silver distance over the past few years. There's been 2 or 3 changes. So the current is, it's a straight distance flight from a start at release to a finish fix located at least 50 kilometers from that release point, and it must be at least 50k from the fix recording the beginning of your takeoff roll. So those who have been sort of around the club and have heard of people doing silver distances 2 or 3 years ago, when they were doing a 50k leg from a remote start, that is no longer available to you. It's quite simple now. Clearly, the rule makers have been trying to put more effort into ensuring that this silver distance flight is taking you away from the airfield with a strong probability of landing somewhere else other than on your own airfield. Now, an important point to pick up here, the first tip here is, it's measured from the release. Therefore, if you certainly if you're taking an aerotow, you need a clear marker on your trace to demonstrate that you've come off the tow. Otherwise, in theory, you could quietly do an aerotow all the way for the 50k. Okay, so the recommendation is you do a tight circle as soon as you release from the aerotow, or do a definite drop in height. Open the air brakes for a few seconds, drop down, close the air brakes, go back into your thermal, and start climbing and establish yourself. The other thing is, you can now measure it to a release, to a final fix. It's not necessarily measured to your landing point. Therefore, you can fly beyond your chosen landing point, choose a fix at that point, and then come back to your landing point. And the distance will be measured to the best advantage there. One of the other rules is the silver distance should not be flown with guidance from another pilot. That basically means you can't get radio advice, such as, hey blokes, come over here. I'm in a nice 4-knot thermal here. And you can't do it in a team flying mode, i.e. two of you traveling in more or less in tandem, finding thermals for each other. But it does not exclude thermaling with any other gliders that you happen to come across on that flight. All right? So, you know, just if you see another glider thermaling, there's absolutely nothing wrong in going and joining that guy in that thermal. Now, the silver distance, it can be part of a longer declared distance from the same flight. It's probably less attractive now under the 2019 rules than it used to be 2 or 3 years ago. But if you are, say, going to do it, because you've got to be at least 50k away from basically from your airfield now, then doing it as part of, say, the BGA 100k closed circuit flight is not as attractive, because you'd end up doing 50k away and then return to do 50k back. But if you are doing that, then you need to be careful that the start conditions for that other flight, for a closed circuit flight, are different to the ones I just quoted for the silver distance flight, where you go from the release point or from start of takeoff roll. For a closed circuit flight, you have to go through a start line, which is defined. Next is a declaration is required, which has got a minimum of the pilot name, the glider type, the glider registration. And the next is that one official observer needs to verify that the recorder on which you're going to record this flight is actually in your glider at the time you take off. And then, of course, not an FAI requirement, but clearly an SGC requirement, is you need the permission of the SGC duty instructor on the day. Now, he's going to undoubtedly ask you things about and check that you've done some pre-planning for this flight. You're not just sort of rocked up on the day, seen some cumulus in the sky and thought, I'm going to go from the silver distance. So he'll probably quiz you about when do you think is the appropriate launch time, what NOTAMs there are, what's airspace restrictions, what preparation you've done. Have you made arrangements with an OO to verify the logger or the position recorder you're going to do? And is your trailer in a fit condition to go on the road? There is another rule, which is the 1% rule. Basically, the maximum height loss cannot be more than 1% of the distance flown. So if you only fly exactly 50 kilometers, then the maximum loss of height across that flight from your release point to your landing point cannot be more than 500 meters. Right. If, however, you've achieved the silver distance flight that's claimed as one leg of a longer flight, then the 1% rule applies to the total distance flown, not just the loss of height over the 50k leg. Okay, and remember, you can also select a position fix from the flight recorder data as a remote finish, which is quite advantageous, really. So, proof of flight. How are you going to prove that you've actually done that flight? Go back a few years, before flight recorders were generally used, then you had to get a barograph, smoke it, get it all sealed up, put it in the glider. The OO would check it was in the glider, it would be sealed in the glider, and you'd go off and do the flight. Now I think virtually all of us have access to either a flight recorder or a position recorder. The difference between those two is that the flight recorder records pressure, altitude, as well as GPS location. Obviously, if it's doing the GPS, it does the position and the altitude. A position recorder is a nationally approved device which you can use, which records GPS data and can be used for both silver and gold badge claims only. Your flight will be invalid if the loss of height exceeds 1% of distance using barometric pressure, if the loss of height exceeds 1% of the distance minus 100 meters, if you're using just a position recorder. This is to recognize that where you're taking the data just purely from a GPS, then it's not as accurate as the taking it from barometric pressure. Now, a flight recorder basically should be within its calibration period, and that is, it should be tested at least within 5 years prior to your flight, or you can actually have it retested up to 2 months after the flight. If it's outside of that period, then you can still use it, and it may or may not just be classified as either a flight recorder or a position recorder. If there is if you've only just marginally done the 50K and there's any doubt about the meeting the loss of height, then the BGA may ask for a calibration chart for that particular flight. So it really depends on how well you do on the day as to whether you need to provide a calibration chart.
Derek, we
Yep.
have a question from Peter, and he'd like to know what is the point of the 1% rule?
It's just an FAI rule, as far as I can see. No, that's not quite true. If you think about it, let's say you were going to go to Husbos, which is one of the kind of ways you would travel. You could actually take a very high aerotow. So if you remember that graph on the first page I showed you, you only need just over 5,500 feet of height to be able to cover 50K. So in theory, you could take a 5,500 foot aerotow at Seifert and just straight glide it out. So it is to prevent that kind of thing happening. So they've put a limit upon basically how high you can go relative to the distance you've traveled and the height of your landing area. Does that answer the question, Peter?
Yes, thank you very much, Derek. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so just to give you the figures on that, if you're only doing 50K, then your maximum release height is 1640 feet. 60K, it's 1968 feet. 70K, 2296 feet, and 80K, 2600 feet. Now, what you need to remember is if you're using just a position recorder for that flight, then there's a further penalty of 100 meters or 328 feet to take into account. Basically, what that means is if you're using a position recorder, you need to go basically an extra 3 kilometers. So you can get away with a flight recorder just covering 50 kilometers if you're within the 1% height loss. With a position recorder, you would have to go at least 53K. Okay. Now, the type of problems which you might recognize you face on that. Tiredness. All right, it doesn't sound a very long flight, but if you think about it as the whole picture of the day. You've got up at 7 o'clock in the morning, you've grabbed a quick breakfast, you've bombed off to the gliding club, you got there, you've got involved in rigging the aircraft. If it's a privately owned aircraft, you're probably going to be involved in rigging a few of your mates' gliders. You're then straight into the clubhouse and you're starting to do your prep work before the flight. Then you're getting down to the launch point, and then you're going to do the flight. And the flight will probably take you up to 2 hours. So there could be quite a long time at which you've been quite active. If you become tired, you've got the risk of loss of concentration. That is going to affect your navigation and thermaling skills. And I can vouch for that. It didn't happen to me on my silver distance flight, but I particularly remember when I was coming to the end of my 300k flight. I was coming up back from south from the Ludlow area. I was approaching Cosford. My GPS was telling me how far I'd got to go to get back to Seaford. I was at quite a reasonable height, but my brain could not work out whether I could get there or not, or whether I needed another thermal. It was 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. The sky was perfectly blue, much like it is at the moment. And off at 90 degrees, just on the north side of Cosford Airfield, was a beautiful big one cloud in the sky. And I'm sitting there thinking, do I turn right and go for that last thermal of the day? What happens if I get there and I'm underneath the working part of it? I'm at 3,000 feet, can I? No. And I just couldn't work it out. So in the end, I took a chance. I turned right, went under the cloud, and fortunately for me, it was still working at the height I was at. But it does show you that, you know, you can reach a point where you can easily lose some of the skill which is necessary. Obviously, this is your first time of really flying away from the site. You may well feel a reluctance to fly away from the field. Thing to remember is you ain't going to stay up unless you go to where the lift is. So at the start of the flight, what we would strongly recommend you do is you sample 2 or 3 thermals. Work out exactly how high you can go in those thermals. Maybe even, you know, which side of the thermal seems to be working on a regular basis. Is it the sunny side? Is it in the middle or what? And then drift away from your starting area, start and go 5-10 kilometers down track. Start, you know, build the confidence that yes, I can gain enough height in the thermals. The sky ahead looks similar to the sky I've just been getting the thermals in. We might as well carry on. Next problem you could face is the choice between having a full bladder or dehydration. Neither is acceptable. If you're struggling with a full bladder, again, your navigation and thermal skills will suffer, and you certainly don't want to be struggling with a full bladder if you're actually facing your first land out. Dehydration is clearly not acceptable. Basically, if you feel thirsty, then you're already dehydrated. What I've done personally over the years is I carry a camelback type of system with a tube across my shoulder and underneath my shoulder straps. And every time I take a climb, I treat myself, I reward myself with a drink. So I'm having a small drink on a very regular basis. And it's something which works for me and keeps me hydrated. Bear in mind also that you need to carry sufficient water for the conditions of that flight. We're not just talking about enough water for 1.5 hours. You may end up in a field for 3 or 4 hours waiting to be retrieved. And if you've got a workable method of urine disposal, that's a definite advantage. I can say that again from my 300k flight. I didn't have any means of getting rid of urine in my little K6. I now have a urine disposal system in my Libelle. A lot of people have plastic bags which they carry and seal up. Well, whichever method you go, have something. Again, if you're dying to pass water and you're trying to concentrate on doing your field landing, it doesn't help. Food. If you don't eat regularly, then you haven't stand a chance of your blood sugar levels going down, and that will again put you into the situation of not being able to concentrate, and your navigation, your flying skills, etc., will drop down. Again, you know, the length of the flight is relatively short, and you think, I don't really need any food for a 1.5 hour flight. But look at the whole day. The last food you had was at 7 o'clock in the morning, right, when you had your breakfast. You've been on the field ever since then. You've been busy all the time. You've perhaps not been drinking on the ground, and you've not been taking any food. So highly recommend you drink and eat on the ground before you take off, and take drink and food with you on the flight. Comfort. How comfortable are you in the glider which you're in? You know, be familiar with that on the glider which you're going to use. I know there's been odd days when I thought I was just going up for a short flight, and I've had a fairly thick wallet in my back pocket. Oh, that begins to hurt after a while. You know, you don't need a big wallet. Take a bit of money out in case you land out and need it. Stick it somewhere where you're not having to sit on it. Yeah. If you think you might be lost, then there's no need to get into a panic about that initially. Climb up initially, then look around, use your chart, and work out from there where you are and which direction you then need to go in. Everyone happy with that? Right, some positive tips. The 7P rule. Have you all heard about the 7P rule? Let's see if I can remember it. Positive pre-planning prevents piss poor performance. Right? And that starts well before the day of your flight. The good news is you're actually starting some of that pre-planning now. I just told you what the current rules are which you need to abide by on the flight. You can be looking at your chart, thinking about different weather conditions and which direction you would go in. You can download the BGA claim form for that flight and make sure you fully understand what information you require on the day. Okay, because you're going to need various signatures from people. You're going to need a launch certificate. You're going to need a landing certificate. So you're going to have to be talking to an OO. Clearly, you must fly with a current 500,000 aeronautical chart. And please, pre-fold it so it shows the whole of your flight you're on. Why do I say that? Because I can assure you that being halfway through a flight in a little K6 cockpit, trying to fully refold a chart is bloody hard work. So have it folded so you've got the whole of the flight which you've got planned on. Because of the relatively short distance, that should not be any problem. From your chart, note just 2 or 3 major ground features that will assist your navigation on the route you're going on. And we'll come back to that when I show you a couple of examples at the end of this talk. Take your time. In fact, it's not a race. It's not like Mike's talk last week. You don't gain any points for being the quickest to do this flight. You've just got to achieve the flight. So in many senses, just milk all the lift you possibly can from each thermal. Right? Your silver distance flight will be basically have a downwind component up your backside. So you can just be going round and round in a circle and you're getting closer and closer to your destination. If you are going to another airfield, then you can start to think about how you're going to get on about getting back home at the end of the day. One possibility is you could get an aerotow return from that club. So discuss with the duty instructor whether he thinks that that would be suitable for you in those conditions on that day. Make sure you set QNH, because there will be some airspace problems, really, on pretty much any sensible silver distance route out of Seaford. One of the most popular routes is, as it says on the next line down, is from Seaford to Husbos. And there is a 4,500 altitude limit on a lot of that. And I know I have been part way down there at times, and the lift has been so strong that I've actually had to open the air brakes to prevent myself going into the airspace. If you hit the airspace, your flight is not valid. It's as simple as that. That is probably one of the first things which the official observer will check for. Okay. So there's a chart, and I'll talk initially about going from Seaford to Husbos. So there's Seaford, straight down that dotted line to Husbos, a distance of 88k. Now you'll notice that that passage takes you right along the edge of some relatively low airspace at the north of Birmingham. You're limited to 3,500 foot there. So if you try to follow that thing, sorry, go back, then you're limiting your choice. Clearly, you can't fly in a straight line like that. You're going to follow the energy lines. That will maybe somewhere off to the left, somewhere off to the right. If you try to follow that dotted line, you are really restricting your choices of finding the energy line to just to the left of that track. If you set the track up like that, so that's picking out an area between Blitzfield Reservoir and Rugeley Power Station. So there's two big things. And basically, what I'm saying is, from Seiford at 3,000 to 4,000 feet, I can see Blitzfield Reservoir. Navigation is not a problem. That's the direction I'm heading in. When I want to turn the corner there, as long as I've got sort of Blitzfield on my left, Rugeley Power Station on my right, I can then choose either left or right of that theoretical track, which is the best energy line to follow. Making that detour is actually only adding barely 3 kilometers to the theoretical distance. That's neither here nor there. 3 kilometers will cost you about 300 foot of height. You could put a little marker on your track there. That marker I've put there is about 60k down, so that I can get an impression, a good impression of when I've actually achieved the 50k. So that's then taken half the pressure off, or you've actually achieved the flight. Now, it would be nice to carry on to Husbos. I was landing at Husbos. You know for a fact that the surface of that field is going to be okay for landing in. Always a little bit of a doubt with if you're making a field landing elsewhere. So you can help yourself like that. And what I would do is, touch pads, I hate them.
Derek?
Yeah.
Just on your last slide, where was WNE turn point? Husbos and Shobdon, I understand those. Where's the 63k?
Well, if I've got two thin red lines. The top one is going to Welsh Pool there, which is WNE. That red line is down to Shobdon, and the black line is down to Husbos.
Cool.
Where we are situated, there isn't sufficient room north of us to do a 50k flight, because you run into the lower level airspaces when you get up just beyond Crewe. Most of the best gliding weather, soaring weather, comes when the wind is coming somewhere from the northwesterly through to northeasterly. That generally gives us the best conditions, which fits in quite nicely with where we are at Seiford. Is you're looking for a flight somewhere south of Seiford. Okay, so just going back up.
Another question, Derek, from Peter. Is interesting question, actually. I'm doing the Fertile course at the moment, so it's quite relevant for me as well. Peter's asking, strictly theoretically, can you ask for permission to penetrate Class D? And if granted, will the flight be valid? Only an academic question, he said.
Yes. But if you think about it, if you're trying to follow that route, you may or may not get permission. If you've got to drop below 3,500 feet, then you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to find the next thermal. Actually taking the time on your first cross country to make radio calls and chat to air traffic control is an added pressure which you don't really need, when by routing just that little bit further, you can more or less guarantee you're going to be clear of that problem. Okay, so the first points which I'd pick up on that are Blitzfield Reservoir and Rugeley. I want to be between there. As I'm going down there, now it doesn't show up at this scale, but when you at home are looking at your chart, you will see that just about that point there on your chart, there's a GVS marked. You know what a GVS is? Anyone? Speak to me. It's a gas venting station. You are strongly advised not to fly directly above a gas venting station in case they let the gas off. And when you look at the chart in detail, you'll see that it says GVS 227, so up to 2,700 foot. So that's the kind of thing which you can pick up in your pre-flight planning when you're looking at the chart. Moving down the track, the only real towns are down here. So keeping the towns on your right-hand side is going to keep you out of the Birmingham airspace problems. When you get down to this area here, then you'll see that you can actually climb a lot higher. The airspace is a lot higher. Now I know you're all going to do this flight and you're all going to be successful at it. So the only other advice I'd give is when you're approaching Husbos, it can be a little bit difficult to see as you're approaching it because there's a whole pile of trees in front of it. But there are two things that can help you track towards it. Just north of Husbos, there is Bruntingthorpe Airfield. Now, having been down there, I know that Bruntingthorpe Airfield actually stands out and looks like that. Big fat area at this end with a big long runway. Roughly in line with the end of the runway will take you straight on to Husbos. If you don't see it immediately, just southwest of Husbos, there's a lake called Stengun Lake. And when you see that, it looks just like a Stengun with the barrel pointing back towards Husbos. And that is more than enough. I remember quite clearly that when I did my Silver Sea flight down there, I was pre-briefed by Peter Gill, and he basically told me, go to Blitzfield Reservoir, turn down the gap. There are two main roads there, one there and one is the motorway. If you are crossing those more or less at right angles, then you're staying on track. You're not drifting either towards the East Mids airspace or the Birmingham airspace. And that is as much detail. You don't want to be spending too much time on too much detail on that. Try. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about
Derek, just a question for me. Just
yeah.
a question from me. Just using the rule of the thumb of the 10 nautical miles on a chart. Is it roughly 10 nautical miles across that corridor? Is it?
Yeah. Could well be.
It's
yeah.
actually quite far away.
Yeah. Yeah. But having marked on your chart the wind direction and strength before you go, it can just act as a reminder as you're going along there as to the direction which you might be being pushed into. Okay. So that can all be looked at prior to going on the flight in that sense. So if we come back, so pre the day of the flight, you can have fully understood the chart and what kind of restrictions you might have in the direction of flight you're going to go on. You've got all the paperwork to hand. You've looked at the weather. You've verified that the trailer's all right. And certainly if you're using a club glider, you're probably going to use the FLARM unit in that as your flight recorder. It would be advisable to get yourself your own micro SD card ready for when you do the flight. On the day of the flight, then make sure you get to the launch point fairly early. You don't want to be rushed into starting this flight. You know, you want to go when the conditions are at the best and when you are settled and ready to go on the flight. You've got your retrieve crew sorted out. You might want to double check the weather on the morning. For instance, you could look up the RASP blitz spot for Huzbaz and what do they think the weather's likely to be at the kind of time which you expect to be in that area. You've looked up your NOTAMs, including the RATs, the temporary ones. If you're going on a route where there's a reasonable possibility that you may want to speak to someone on the radio, you've preferably got those frequencies fixed in your radio before you go. Again, it's a lot more hassle if you're having to look at the chart and try and read what the frequency is and then put it into the radio before you can speak, because you may be getting low and you may be wanting to speak quite urgently to someone. And as I said before, you need to eat and drink in the morning. If you're using a club glider, I would recommend that it's you who does the DI in the morning. Make sure you've got a fresh battery in it that's fully charged. Last thing you want is to have a successful flight, but not be able to get the data. Things like that have happened. If I harken back to the days of the smoked barograph, I remember someone who got his barograph all in the glider, all sealed up, and he did the flight to Huzbaz. He also did his silver height on that flight and his 5 hours. And then he found that he'd put the barograph in upside down and the needle hadn't recorded any data. So not being rushed, take your time, get the aircraft set up fully, make sure the instruments are turned on. Remember, one way of measuring the start is from the start of your roll, your takeoff roll. So make sure that you power up your flight recorder in ample time, that it's picked up the satellites and everything, and it's working. Right. And obviously in the morning you've linked up with an OO and you're taking him along with you. He's verifying that these things are in the glider. If you're using the FLARM in the glider, then basically it's a fixed unit, and that makes life easier. If you're using a position recorder or a demountable recorder, by a position recorder, I'm talking about mainly those little units which you can buy from the BGA and just hang around your neck. Or you could be, say, using a Kobo with XC-SAW or top hat, which is demountable from the glider. If it's not fixed in the glider, then the OO needs to be specifically careful to ensure that that unit is in your glider when you take off. So all this takes time to set up. Make sure you take the paperwork with you, because you can get the landing certificate signed there and then. You could one of the biggest reasons, I guess, why a successful flight ends up as a non-successful flight is because the proof of that flight cannot be verified by the OO. So you must not download that flight and just go up to an OO with the SD card or with your Kobo saying, I've done my silver distance flight, here it is, because that OO cannot verify that that recording unit was in the glider at that time.
Derek,
Yeah.
has the rule on Kobos changed because they were not allowed as recorders?
It's not an IGC approved flight recorder, but you could certainly use it as a position recorder. And if you look at the form, the BGA claim form, it says specifically that the BGA may call for a calibration chart where there is any doubt regarding the difference in height. So you may or may not get away with using it for the height as well, but it will certainly be valid as a position recorder in my opinion. If you had done your Silver Sea distance and I was the OO and I had downloaded your flight from the Kobo, which I knew was in the glider when you took off, and it verified that flight, I would be happy to sign the form.
Oh, right, okay. Because I was told different in Australia, that the FIA rules, they didn't accept them. And it had to be like one of those BGA data loggers or
Yeah.
a FLARM system.
Yeah. Well, I personally don't see a problem with it. You might come across an OO who wouldn't accept it. I think that Basil Fairstone at the BGA, who cross-checks these things, I think he would accept it. But if there's any doubt, give Basil a ring. Ask him. Not on the day, obviously, prior to it, so you can set up the appropriate equipment if he wouldn't accept it.
Hi Derek, it's Paul here.
Yeah.
I had a chat with Basil at the conference, and he was saying nowadays what they like to see is an IGC file with any claims.
Yeah,
So
but
providing you can download an IGC file, it's not an issue.
yeah, and a Kobo running XC SAW will give you an IGC file.
Exactly.
So,
Well, one question, Derek, we have from
Yeah.
Peter is who are the official observers at the club, the OOs at the club?
there are quite a few. We don't have a named list up on the wall. You're going to have to ask around, but there are quite a few. I mean, I'm one. Peter Gill is one. I think Mel Chapman is one. I don't know outside of that, but there are a few. Okay, so that's what you need to prepare in all this 7P planning on the day before your flight. When you're actually airborne on the flight, then remember, mark your release point. Basically climb up to cloud base initially. Do 2 or 3 climbs like that, probably starting to drift down from Seaford on your chosen route. All the time, what you're basically doing, ask yourself, is you're looking further down track for your next thermals. If the sky looks the same down there as where you've just been thermaling, you can go with some confidence. Locate a landmark either under your next chosen thermal or in line with it further out. Climb up in that thermal and then head off towards that landmark into the next thermal. obviously doing it that way, because if you wait until you've climbed up to cloud base, then you can't really see the thermals ahead of you. So always, the way I fly is when I start into a thermal, yes, I'm going to make this, I'm going to carry on with this thermal. I will then look for the next energy source down the track which I want to travel on. Okay. And basically, thereafter, aim to stay high. Don't cruise as that graph I showed you on the first page. Don't cruise all the way down to your lower acceptable limit. Take the lift as it comes along, climb back up. It's not the fastest way of doing the flight, but it'll certainly give you the best chance of success. Basically, float with the wind. The wind is your friend. It's helping you. It's pushing you towards your goal. So you really want to always be trying to fly at a height where you're able to just concentrate on the navigation and good thermaling skills, rather than being worried that the ground is really rather close here. I ought to be thinking, trying to find myself a field. But like I said before, make sure that if you're in a strong thermal, don't milk it to the ultimate limit if it's taking you close to the airspace limit. It will take you some time to get out of a strong thermal, and that may carry you up into the airspace. Okay. Now, this is a trace from Warren Johnson, who did that Husbaz flight in a K6 CR, and that's just there to show you that it doesn't have to be really a stonking day. Let's say the airspace down that route starts off at 5.5, drops to 4.5, and then goes back up to, I think it is 6.5, shortly before Husbaz. Now, Warren did that flight, never getting much above 3,000 feet. So by concentrating on the flying skills there, he turned in a very good performance there. Is there anything? Is Warren with us? Is there anything which Warren would like to add on that flight? No, he's resting on his laurels, is he? Okay, right. So I'd like now to move on to what I call my two happy endings. I think so. We come out of that. Remind me again, Andrew, I need to come out of this PowerPoint if I want to open CU, don't I? No? Right, can't hear you, Andrew.
That's right. If you close that window.
Yeah.
And then that's the end of your sharing screen. So then
right, so I need to share another screen.
Share your screen and choose your CU.
Right. Oh, damn. I've opened it without sharing it. Sorry. Where am I now? Got myself lost now.
Don't worry. Just go back to the
share.
meeting. Click share.
Right. Can you all see that flight? This is a flight from Seifert.
Not just yet. Not just yet. It's saying it's started screen sharing.
Is there a problem, Andrew?
It's not sharing the screen at the moment. Can anyone see Derek's screen, or is it just me?
No, it's saying
the share. So then you're back.
Right. So share screen.
Try doing it again. Try doing it again.
Wrong one.
There we go. We got it.
That's the wrong one. I wasn't paying attention to what it was showing me.
Yeah.
Stop. So I need to hit stop share now, do I? to get back to the basic screen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
And
So
then
share
flip it
screen.
down. Yeah. I have to say, Derek's doing a sterling job here with the live streaming. Doing brilliant.
Right. How's that then?
Yeah. For some reason, that won't share that screen. For some reason, I don't know why.
Oh.
Do you want me to try and do it?
Yeah.
You give me control of your screen. I've
Right.
just tested it. See if I can do it.
Is that the remote control I need to hit?
Yeah, I'm trying to take over your screen.
You can take over the talk if you want at this stage.
I don't think, given that I've not done a silver distance,
well,
I don't think I'll be very well.
Oh, mate, I've practiced going from screen to screen half a dozen times in the past few days, and for me, of course, it's worked. But
okay, I'll bring you back onto presenting. Do you want to have one more go, Derek?
What do I need to do now? I've got a big box which saying you can regain control at any time by clicking on your screen, approve or decline.
You've got control. So
do I need to hit the approve button?
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask for it again. If you just try sharing your screen again, Derek, one more time.
Share screen.
If not, we'll have to miss the CU, I think, and we can move on.
Ah, well, that's a shame because the next one was one I particularly wanted to show you because it includes a land out.
Okay. We'll get there.
Right. I've hit it and I've hit share. Is that any better?
There you go. Got it. Brilliant.
Right. Okay. Good. My mistake. I don't think I hit share in the bottom right-hand corner. Right. This is a flight done by Nigel Frost from Seifert down to Shobdon. First of all, we will just show you. Clearly done by an aerotow. He's doing a bit of local soaring first of all. At this stage, he's not particularly high. If you see on that, well, he's now worked his way up to 3,700 feet. So he's sampling a few thermals here first of all. Now he sets off. Now, pause it there. If you notice there, he's quite close to airspace. Here, of course, he can be at 5,500 feet. See where he is, but he's quite close to the 4,500 feet there. But he doesn't go into it, so all fine. Right, here, he's actually crossing the Cosford mats, well outside the ATZ. And if you have a look at the details, he's actually at 5,000 feet. So he's well above the mats. No real pressure to radio in. The beauty of going on this route is once he comes out of the 5.5 bit, then his headroom is basically unrestricted in thermal terms. There he is, just setting himself up around Shobden. He's got there with enough height to sort a good circuit out. Come on, stop. Okay, so that was Nigel's flight. And if Nigel is with us, are there any quick comments he would like to give us on that flight? Come in, Nigel. Now, in that case, you'll have to just live with my interpretation of it.
I've unmuted you, Nigel.
And that's his trace. So you can see that initially comes off the air of tow. He's playing around locally, not particularly high, just under 3,500 feet. Then he gets established, and it's about here where he sets off and on the task. Okay, right. The second happy ending is from Peter Gill. This was actually a planned out in return flight, Seifert to Husbos. On my screen, Husbos is just hiding under the elbow of Dave Nibs on the screen there. But so again, we'll just quickly run through that flight, and you can see how, you know, as you remember, the straight line from Seifert would have taken you straight down there, quite close to the edge of Birmingham airspace, down here, across Hinckley, and into Husbos. And you can see that where he actually flies is off to one side of that track. So that's where the energy lines were. Now, Peter being a very experienced cross-country pilot, he doesn't spend as much time as most normal people who are actually attempting the Silver Sea in the local area. He has a confidence on the weather that day, and so he goes. That little blue circle there, that's the GVS I was talking about earlier. Just behind Dave Nibs, he's now thermaling just outside Husbos and gaining enough height to head back on the return trip. Let's make sure I stop this at the right place. So coming up here, obviously he's beginning to feel find it maybe a little bit more difficult to gain height, and he's at 3,000 feet at the moment. So what I'll do now is I will slow this down and home in to a very small area and set it again going. Then you'll see him appearing, carrying on. Stop that just to check. He's now at 2,400 feet. So obviously the day is deteriorating. Right, let's see there. So he's now at 2,200 foot. Clearly feels he can't carry on that line. There's nothing close enough, I'm assuming.
It was blue.
We will let Peter talk us through this in a minute or so. Go away. So. Wow, that's gone to 0.5 kilometre. I didn't want that. That's a bit too. Okay. So here he is, trying quite hard to thermal. Still, he's now at. He's still at 2,500 feet, but obviously there's nothing very strongly working. Still trying.
It's a cliffhanger of a story, this one, isn't it?
We will let Peter explain what was going through his mind at
I had a
these
nice green
stages.
strip underneath me, and I wasn't going to go away.
Right.
So I landed on it.
See, you know. So, I mean, in my opinion, what he's done is somewhere over here, he has identified a good landing area. He's still at sufficient height. He's 1,000 foot. I mean, if you take 1,000 foot winch launch at Seifert, you would try and find a local thermal, wouldn't you? But clearly, he's staying in this area. This is the field he's identified. When he finally gives up, there's a nice circuit all the way down past it, round and in to a nice landing.
If anybody's low in that area, it's Siffles Farm. It's a microlight strip, and they're very friendly.
Is there anything else you would like to add to that, Peter?
No, I'm still sweating.
Okay, so so that's about it from me. Any final questions? And I'll try and answer them, and anyone else can butt in with answers as well.
Hi, Derek. It's Paul Thompson here.
Yeah.
You haven't mentioned what happens when you land out, either say somewhere like Husbos, for example, or if you land in a field. You talked about the landing certificate. Who do you get to do that for us?
Well, yeah, okay. If you look at the form again, it's all on there. You either an OO has to certify that this glider landed at this position at this time. If it's not an OO, then you need to get 2 signatures from people who will undoubtedly flock to this field to see this crashed aircraft. That's the way it generally goes. But yeah, I mean, you know, if you get to Husbos, your task for the day, your flight has been successful, but really your claim for the Silver Sea is not over. You then want to find yourself at least a responsible person at Husbos who will sign that landing certificate. If you're using something like a position recorder, i.e. a demountable unit as a flight recorder, I think it would be advisable to get an OO to seal that unit at the end of that flight, which you can then, in the sealed condition, you can hand back to your own OO when you get back to Seaford, so that your OO, who's actually going to fill in this and say, yeah, this is an acceptable flight, can feel satisfied that it's not been tampered with, it's not actually been flown by someone else, and he has downloaded, he has the opportunity to download it. As I said before, just if you download it and just give him an SD card, that is not satisfactory. So a bit like the police, if you like, you could put your position recorder or Kobo unit in a sealed bag, signed for by the duty instructor at Husbars or an OO, and then hand that sealed bag to your own OO. I mean, if someone did that with me, I'd be very happy to accept that as a true record of that flight.
We have a question from Paul Hodgetts. I wish I'd had this briefing before my silver distance, which was to the Mind and the Westerly.
Well, no, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think to send someone to the Mind is not the best of choices, really. All right, you're definitely, if you make it, you're not going to have a problem with your 1% loss of height, are you not? Because your landing is going to be above your release point. But you're actually flying into an area where your land out options are perhaps not as good as going either to Welshpool, where you can end up, if you look at the chart, there's a nice valley just to the south of Welshpool Airport, if you can't actually get into I didn't name anyone. The guilty shall keep their secrets, according to me. So you know, there's a nice valley just to the south of Welshpool. Going down to Shobdon, it's a lot of flat area. Going down to Husbars, there's a lot of flat areas, which I think is a much better choice of direction for your first cross country and possible land out. I mean, I did a flight where I ended up aiming for the Mind on a cross country flight, and I headed straight for it, and I had awful trouble getting height in the hills just to the east of Church Stretton. In fact, I was so close to a cow on one hill, he was taking a great interest in looking me above it. All right, it wasn't a fantastic problem because, of course, the slope of the hill, I could escape down that and gain myself some height. But I was talking about the problems I had that with Colin Ratcliffe later, who was much more experienced in that area. And what he then told me was, there's only one way you should be approaching the Mind, and that's from the north and the west. I didn't know that, and I find it somewhat daunting to be in that area. If I was a duty instructor, it's not a destination I would prove. I mean, if you're going towards the Mind, then why not head down towards Shobdon?
Derek,
yeah.
Tiago here. I think one of the big issues that the young pilots have, or the most inexperienced pilots have, is to actually break that. I need to go away from my airfield to do the 50K. So what advice have you got? You know, how do you break that link, and you mentally prepare yourself that today's the day kind of thing?
Right. Well, do flights around Seaford that build you confidence. If you remember last week, Mike was talking a lot about the balance between confidence and fear. If you do some flights around Seiford, to build that confidence, let me just see now. If I go to share screen, for example, we have a little local triangle there that runs from Stone there to Aqualate to junction 13 on the M6, and none of those points is more than 10 kilometers away from Seiford. But if you go out to Aqualate, up to Stone and back to Seiford, then what, you've done 28, you've done 30 odd K. Go all the way around that, go down to the next point and back, you've done well over 50K. And it's a rather more difficult flight than your Silver Sea flight, because clearly some of that is going to be into wind. Your performance is not going to be as good. And to actually achieve it, you've actually got to hit some specific points. So, you know, that's one way you can build it up. If Andrew can get me out of this, I can show you another set of flights which you can do. Get out of that. Right, okay. The other thing is, you've possibly heard about the Staffordshire Gliding Club's Lakes Country cross-country tasks. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a whole series of those. And you can see that some of those distances, like for instance, if you go from Seiford to Trentham, back to Seiford, and then out to Aqualate and back, that in itself is more than 50K. But you're never more than 14K away from the site. 14K, if you've got the wind with you and you're flying efficiently, it's only going to cost you 1,500 feet in height. So you can actually make up lots of little combinations of that. You don't actually have to do the out and return legs. You can make yourself up a triangle with across 2 or 3 of those points.
Derek, question from me: would that still count as your silver distance if you did it as a triangle?
No. Remember what I said at the start of the rules. You have to end up more than 50K from Seiford or from your release point.
This is all just practice. This is great practice.
This is practice, and if you can achieve those flights, they're actually more difficult than doing your Silver Sea, because your Silver Sea is a straight line flight with a wind component up your backside helping you. On some of those flights, you're going to be going into wind, and your navigation is going to have to be more accurate to actually hit the points.
Derek, just the thought that document you've got there is brilliant. I think Chris had actually called it the Lakes Challenge. If you were able to email that to me, then I can send it out as an email to all the members. I think that might be useful for everyone.
It's up in the clubhouse on the wall. And it has been published a couple of years ago in the newsletters, which of course you can look up the back copies on.
Paul here. I've incorporated it in the latest club operating notes, which will be published next month. So it will be available online. So if you can sit at home and look at it by going into the club operating notes, you don't have to go through the previous newsletters.
Fantastic, thanks, Paul.
Okay, and if you notice, the first 8 points there are covered in blue. They are available to be attempted by pilots with cross-country endorsement, if I remember right. Oh, I've gone and lost it again. I keep hitting the wrong thing. Right, I mean, if you read the rules above it, I've closed that now, unfortunately. But if you read it, you know, so what you would do is, if you think it's a suitable day, you would choose a task around that kind of thing. Talk to the duty instructor. If he agrees, you can attempt it. Because if it's a good day, any of those first 8 points are all in what can be called local gliding distance of the site.
I think that's the main difference, isn't it? Because if you do your first point and you know, okay, I mean the safety of a surrounding that I know, then in a way you almost get a bit more comfortable and get a bit more psyched up to do the flight. When you then have to fly to a zone that you've probably never seen before, that's when mentally it becomes a lot harder, even though the task itself, like you said, is much more straightforward, because all you have to do is almost point the nose and sort of go.
Yeah. There's no doubt the Silver Sea distance flight has been designed as your first flight leaving the nest, as they call it, right? I remember I did the one to Husbaz. Like I say, Peter Gill had very kindly told me, head towards Blitzfield Reservoir, turn slightly right, and just go down the gap. Wasn't a major problem. I mean, when I did my Silver Sea flight, it's 88k in total. I took 5 thermals across that whole distance, and I got to Husbaz at 3,000 feet. I mean, that's a point which I should just mention. If you are landing it out at another gliding club, it makes a great deal of sense to get there at a height where you can sit and observe what their pattern of flying is on the day. When I got there, I was at 3,000 feet, and I sat and watched. Oh yeah, they're taking off part way up the field, and they're generally landing behind and rolling up towards the launch point. So it took me 5 thermals in total. Could have been done in 4, clearly, but I would have been scraping into Husbaz. And so I probably had 1 thermal between Seifert and Blitzfield Reservoir, and it was time then to top up a bit more. And I can remember it now. I turned there. I can't see Seifert from there, so I might as well carry on, because you get to Blitzfield, your 20 odd K is completed. So actually, it's as far to go back to Seifert as it was to
Carry on.
complete the Silver Sea flight.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, that about it.
That's brilliant. Has anyone else got any questions for Derek? Well, I think on behalf of all of us, a huge thank you, Derek, for taking the time to prepare the talk that you've done tonight. Absolutely brilliant. I've certainly learned an awful lot, and I'm sure we've got a lot of experienced pilots, obviously, on the talk who've well and truly done their Silver Seas, but I'm sure it's been a really good refresher for everyone. So thank you so much for taking the time and giving us all the talk. We've all enjoyed it. We have on the schedule for next week, we've got Peter Gill, his flight's been featured today, giving us a talk on wave flying at Seifert, which we're looking forward to. And then on the 20th, we've got Paul Witters, our CFI, talking about task planning and preparation, which has been touched upon by Derek as well, talking about the silver distance this evening. But obviously, Paul will go into a bit more detail about checking the weather and task planning in terms of navigation, etc. So Paul's going to give us that. And then we've also got Tiago, who's been talking to us tonight, asking one of the questions. He's giving us a talk on the 27th, which is relevant for me at the moment, particularly from solo to bronze and beyond. So for a lot of ab initio pilots like me who are solo, but working towards our bronze, Tiago, who's been through his bronze last year and cross-country endorsement, is all going to give us a talk about his experience of that period of flying career from getting solo and getting the bronze, both in terms of the the studying and the exam, and also then the cross-country endorsement as well. So we've got a number of really good talks planned in the next few weeks during May. Anyone else who'd like to volunteer, I'd be really grateful. Any volunteers we've got who'd like to give a talk about something. The general idea is for us all to get together, you know, once a week as a club, try and keep the club as best as we can, as though everybody's at home on lockdown and we can't go flying. Of course, we'd all rather be at the club and flying, but I think it's a great way of keeping everyone in touch. So yeah, anyone who'd like to give a talk, it doesn't have to be instructional like Derek's this evening. It could be an interesting talk about a flight you've done, or an expedition, or a trip somewhere, or, you know, something different, just to keep us all entertained with a beer on a Wednesday night. But feel free, everyone, if you want to turn off your mute and say hi to everyone, etc. Feel free to do that, and we look forward to seeing you. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Derek. Cheerio, everybody.
Cheerio.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Derek.
thanks,
Well
Derek.
done,
Great
buddy.
talk. Thank you.
Good night, and see you soon, I hope.
Good night, all.
Good night. Good night, sir.